The wind swept through Hollow Bluff like it had something to say, whistling through cedar cracks and carrying the scent of old firewood, and something older still, silence. It was the kind of silence that had weight to it, like an old blanket thrown over the shoulders of the land. Jonah Keats stood beside his weather-stained stable, one hand resting on the withers of his stallion, Ash, the other gripping a dented tin pail. The horse flicked its ears, but did not move. Dusk fell slow in this part of the territory, crawling over the ridge like it feared what it might find. Inside Jonah's cabin, the saber above the mantel hadn't gathered dust in years, though he hadn't touched it in just as long. It hung there, blade dull but clean, next to a sharp's rifle polished to a solemn silver. Some things, Jonah believed, ought to be ready whether you ever needed them or not. The high plains were brittle that year. Rain hadn't come in near 2 months, and the creek was down to a whisper. But Jonah kept the well full and the animals fed. That's how he passed the days, working without need for conversation, letting the land shape his hours. He spoke to no one but Ash, and Ash answered only with the kind of trust that needed no words. It was the sound of boots that broke the quiet. Quick, ragged, desperate. Jonah turned slow, his body calm but coiled, the way a man learns to move after too many years, watching for signs. A figure stumbled from the tree line just beyond the pasture, arms scraped from bramble, dress torn at the hem, hair loose around her face. She moved like someone who had run too far on bad ground and didn't care what it cost. She stopped short when she saw him. Her whole frame went stiff, and for a heartbeat, Jonah thought she might fall right there in the dirt. But her eyes, wide dark, wild with panic, held fast to his. "Please," she said, her voice dry and thin. "They're coming." Jonah didn't move. He studied her like weather, slow and full, deciding what kind of storm she might bring. She looked over her shoulder, back toward the trees. Her breath came sharp. "I just need to hide. One night. That's all." Jonah nodded, a slow tilt of his chin. He turned toward the cabin, the door creaking on its leather hinges. He pushed it open and stepped aside. She hesitated only a second, then darted in. Inside, the place smelled of cedar ash and saddle oil. A low fire burned in the hearth, barely more than embers. The space was plain. Hooks on the walls, horseshoes, a long-handled hammer. Above them, the saber. Beside it, the rifle. All of it neat, ready, untouched by time. Jonah shut the door behind them and slid the bolt. The woman stood near the hearth, arms tight around herself, her back straight but brittle. She didn't ask questions. She looked like someone who'd asked too many already and been punished for it. He poured water from a clay jug into a tin cup and held it out. "Thank you," she whispered. Her hands shook as she drank. Jonah turned to the window, drawing the curtain back just enough to peer through. The trees swayed gently, but the shadows remained still. Stillness, he knew, could be a lie. "I shouldn't have dragged you into this," she said, lowering the cup. He turned just enough to see her, but said nothing. "They'll notice I'm gone soon." "You being followed?" She nodded. "They will be." 5 men, maybe 6. Their leader, Silas Drumlin. He doesn't leave things undone. She sat down on a stool by the fire, wincing as her scraped legs bent beneath her. "I stole something. A ledger. Names, bribes, murders. My pa used to be sheriff down in Calder's Fork. They hanged him from his own barn last winter." Jonah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She took his silence for doubt. "I ain't lying." "I didn't say you were." The sound of his voice startled her. Gravel deep, slow. Like it came from beneath the riverbed. "You gonna give 'em what they want?" he asked. Her lips curled, not in humor. "I'd rather die." Jonah turned back to the window. She looked up at the saber above the mantel. "You a soldier?" He didn't answer. "You don't have to help. Just let me stay the night. I'll be gone by sunup." He moved across the room to a cabinet, pulled out a rolled cloth of bandages, and handed it to her. She blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Outside, the wind shifted. Cooler now. Like the hour before real dark. Jonah began moving through the cabin without a word, latching shutters, checking the rifle, closing the cellar hatch with a quiet thud. She watched him, puzzled. "You've done this before," she said, not quite a question. He paused by the fire. "Been some years." They sat in silence for a long while. The fire crackled low. Coyotes howled in the far hills. "My name's Clara," she said. Jonah gave no name in return. Instead, he opened a narrow drawer beneath the window and pulled out a carved wooden whistle. He stepped outside, lifted it to his lips, and blew a long, low tone. Ash trotted up from the corral and stood near the porch, ears flicking. Back inside, Jonah lit a single oil lamp and snuffed the fire. "Why?" she asked. "Smoke draws eyes." He sat across from her, the rifle resting on the table. Clara's breathing slowed. "I thought someone in Calder's Fork would help. But the preacher, the sheriff, even the postmaster, they're all in that book." Jonah nodded, just once. A sound cracked in the woods, sharp, deliberate. Clara sat up straight. "That could be anything." "Could be," Jonah said. He moved toward the window again. The cabin sat alone at the base of Hollow Bluff. No trails led here unless someone knew to find them. He stood still a long time, until the stars pushed through the sky like silver nails. He said nothing more. Didn't need to. Clara leaned back against the wall. Her eyes fluttered. For the first time since her flight began, she felt a thread of safety wrap around her. Not soft, not warm, but real. Outside, beyond the trees, a branch snapped. Jonah's hand found the rifle. Night had come, and with it, whatever hunted her. Inside, shadows ruled. The oil lamp glowed faint on the table. Clara sat with her knees to her chest, gaze locked on the window. Jonah remained by the door, still as cut stone. The wind had gone still. "You hear that?" she whispered. He nodded. "They're here." A pause, tight as a pulled trigger. "I took the ledger 2 days ago," she whispered. "It's hidden under the floorboards at a boarding house in Calder's Fork. I plan to ride north, find the rangers. My horse broke a stirrup. I've been on foot since." "They'll want the book," Jonah said, "but not before they make an example of you." She nodded. "You kill any of them?" "No, but I watched one of them kill a child." Boy just asked questions. Jonah's grip on the rifle tightened. "What's his name?" he asked. "The one who gave the order." "Silas Drumlin." That name pulled something taut in Jonah's face. It flickered, then vanished. He moved to the wall, unhooked the saber, and set it beside the rifle. Then opened the trunk at the foot of the bed. 2 cartridges, a coil of rope, a leather satchel. "You fought him before," she said. "I knew him before," Jonah answered. "Different time." "Who is he to you?" Jonah loaded the cartridges. Calm, steady. "Someone I didn't stop, when I should have." Outside, a rock clattered off the porch rail. Then another. Jonah peered through the curtain. Shadows shifted at the tree line. Then came the voice, slow, southern, amused. "Well, hell, you got yourself a quiet friend in there, girl." Clara stiffened. "That you, Keats?" the voice called louder. "Didn't think you were still alive. Thought you died with your fancy coat and your morals." A shot cracked the glass beside the door. Clara ducked. Jonah didn't flinch. He raised the rifle and fired. A grunt followed, then silence. "Guess that answers that," he muttered. Clara breathed hard. "You think they'll rush us?" "No," Jonah said. "They'll wait. Let fear do their work." "Got any traps?" "Shotgun under the flour sack. Ammo box behind the stove. Lantern oil, if they come close." She moved fast, shaking but steady. My father didn't raise a fool, she said. Taught me to ride, shoot, and read contracts. Said survival was just literacy with grit. A flicker of a smile threatened Jonah's mouth. Outside, leaves rustled. They were circling. They won't stop, she whispered. They'll torch this place if they have to. I know. You got a tunnel? He looked at her. I do. Then why not run? Jonah met her eyes. Because if we run, they'll burn someone else, another town, another girl. This is where it ends. She stared at him, searching. This is where we make our line. He nodded. Mine. Yours is your choice. She lifted the shotgun, held it firm. I'm done running. Outside, somewhere in the distance, boots scuffed the dry earth, and Jonah knew the quiet had just expired. Some fires start with a spark, others begin with footsteps, and a name that tastes like rust. The first torch hadn't even been lit yet, but Clara could feel the blaze of it somewhere behind the dark. It was in the way the coyotes had stopped howling, in the way Jonah stood without moving, body braced near the window like a hinge on a heavy door, in the way her breath fogged just once before vanishing like a secret. She remembered being 10, lying in bed while her father stepped onto the porch with his rifle and a half-full canteen, waiting for riders he said wouldn't come. They had, of course. They always did. Back then, she'd listened for them in the rustling cottonwoods. Now, they came again, different men, but cut from the same rotten wood. Inside the cabin, the fire had long gone to ash. The oil lamp on the table was turned down to its barest flicker. Clara sat low, shotgun balanced across her knees, her back pressed to the stone hearth. Jonah hadn't spoken since the first shot. His silhouette by the window hadn't shifted in minutes. The only sound was the slow inhale and exhale of breath that both of them tried to quiet, and couldn't. She was still trying to make sense of this man, Jonah Keats, who hadn't asked for her name, yet handed her bandages, who hadn't offered comfort, but sealed the shutters like someone preparing a last sermon. Everything about him was unspoken. Even the rifle in his hands seemed like it was waiting for permission to be remembered. And now, that permission had come. They're not here for the ledger, she said finally, voice low. No, he replied, calm as a man answering a dinner bell. They're here for fire. The words sat between them, quiet, but whole. The wind moved again, whispering around the edges of the cabin as if to check if the place was still alive. Clara tightened her grip on the shotgun. Her palms were slick, not with fear, at least not just that, but with something else. Memory, rage, the kind that sticks to your ribs longer than hunger. She remembered the names in the ledger, every one of them written in the same slanted hand, Silas Drumlin's hand. Notes beside each entry, land deed falsified, witness removed, payment rendered. Some had X's through them. Her father's name was there. So was the preacher's, and the man who'd bought her like he was buying fence posts. Jonah moved from the window and crouched beside the hearth. He opened a small tin and dipped his fingers in something thick, grease or pitch. He rubbed it along the inside of the shutters, fireproofing. Not perfect, but it could buy them time. You trained? He asked. My father took me hunting by the time I was 11. First rifle had a cracked sight and kicked like a mule, but I learned to make the shot count. He nodded once. They'll test our windows, he said. Then the roof. Then the doors. And then they'll get tired of trying. Outside, a voice called. Well, damn, Jonah. Didn't think you were still breathing. Clara flinched, but Jonah's face didn't twitch. That you, Drumlin? He called back, voice sharp and clear. Oh, it's me, the voice returned, sing-song lazy. Didn't figure you for the kind to hole up with runaways and thieves. Thought you'd hung up your virtue with your uniform. Clara peered through a crack in the shutter. The torches were still hidden, but shadows moved at the edge of the trees. crouching, deliberate. Predators. "She with you?" Drumlin asked. "She got something of mine." Clara stood, shotgun ready. "You ever tell the truth, Drumlin?" she called. He laughed. "Only when I'm talking to a corpse." Jonah loaded a fresh round. "He'll wait. Let fear stir the blood before the cut." Clara looked around. "You got more traps?" "Some," he said. "Snares along the back trail. Bear claw rig at the cellar hatch. Oil set beneath the porch floor. But it won't last forever." "I'm not planning on forever." Jonah glanced toward the table, where the saber rested beside the oil lamp. Its hilt caught the weak light. He didn't touch it. Not yet. They waited. And then the first move came. A flaming bottle arced through the dark. Clara saw it coming and ducked. It shattered against the far post of the porch, flame licking up the old wood. Jonah was already there. He yanked a soaked horse blanket from the basin and smothered it, boot grinding the glass into ash. Another bottle. This one crashed near the side wall. Fire bloomed like a snake uncoiling. Clara leapt to the second window and fired through the wood. A man yelped. She ducked and pumped the shotgun once. "That's one," she whispered. Jonah fired through the front. A figure tumbled into the dirt beside the split-rail fence. Outside, Drumlin's voice rang again, this time a little more ragged. "Well now, that ain't polite, Jonah. We was just getting reacquainted." Jonah called back. "Last time we visited, you left Cold Creek with 14 men. Only 2 made it back." Silence for a moment. Then a low chuckle. "You were always the righteous one," Drumlin said. "How's that working out?" "I sleep." A torch flickered nearer. The air stank of oil and sweat. Clara pressed her shoulder to the window frame, shotgun ready. Jonah crossed the room, doused the last of the fire embers in the hearth. Steam rose and vanished into the thick dark. "You ever think we die for nothing?" she asked. Jonah didn't answer right away. When he did, it was quiet. "I'm not dying for paper. I'm dying for the chance you don't have to." Her throat caught on something. But she didn't let it show. Instead, she checked the ammo again. Outside, another man moved low behind the cabin. Jonah signaled to Clara with 2 fingers. She took the back corner, eyes sharp. A silhouette leaned close to the cellar hatch. Jonah waited. So did she. The trap snapped with a crack. A snare caught the man's leg and yanked him into the wall. He shouted, panicked, clawing at the dirt. Jonah moved like a storm breaking. Out the door, across the yard. The man fumbled for a pistol. But Jonah kicked it aside, struck him hard in the ribs with the butt of his rifle, and dragged him back toward the cabin. Clara held the door open, eyes wide. Jonah dropped the man at her feet. "Found your whisper." From the dark, Drumlin's voice snapped. No more humor in it. "You touch him, Keats, and I'll burn your bones into the dirt." Jonah crouched beside the outlaw and spoke low. "Ledger tells me where you've been. But he tapped the man's chest, tells me where you're going next." The man spat blood. "You're already dead." Jonah turned to Clara. "Hold him." She did. Outside, the torches moved again. 6 men remained. They spread wide, circling like wolves, their laughter gone. Drumlin's voice returned, hard now. "You think this ledger's worth your skin?" Jonah answered from the window. "No, but it might be worth theirs." The wind picked up again. Pine branches rattled. Clara joined him. Sweat glistened on her brow, soot streaking her cheek. Her eyes were fire-lit, sharp. "You really a captain in the war?" "I was." "You don't talk like the others." He looked at her, rifle resting. Other men didn't come back with this silence. She turned back to the dark. They waited. Another man crept near the rear window, creeping on his belly. He thought quiet made him clever. Clara cracked the shutter and showed him the barrel. He froze. "Run," she said. He did. 2 more shots rang out from the trees, wild, unfocused. One slammed into the outer wall. The other went wide. The gang was getting jumpy. Inside, Jonah reloaded. We'll run out of rounds before they run out of hate. Clara looked at the cellar hatch. Then maybe it's time we move. Not yet, Jonah said. She stared. You're waiting for someone. He didn't answer. Then she saw it. A movement near the far end of the tree line. Taller, leaner, deliberate. Not like the others. He wasn't carrying a torch. He was waiting. Come on out, Keats, Silas called. Let's finish what we didn't back in '64. You and me, with fire instead of metals. In the West, night is a coin toss. Heads, you sleep. Tails, you bleed. The stars above Hollow Bluff had thinned to pinpricks behind a rising veil of smoke. The kind of smoke that didn't drift. It clung, thick and unmoving, waiting for air to stir it. The quiet outside wasn't real anymore. It was something held back. Breath by breath, as though the whole night were holding its own lungs. Jonah Keats hadn't shifted from the window since Silas Drumlin's last words. His body remained still, but his eyes moved, tracking shadows, measuring gaps, counting seconds like a field captain studying a ridge before the artillery came. The Sharp's rifle lay across the window ledge, his finger just brushing the trigger guard. Beside him, Clara Boone crouched with her back to the side wall, her frame tense but composed. The sweat along her temple had dried and reformed 3 times since the siege began. Jonah had once told himself he would never lift a rifle again, never stand at another window and measure the cost of silence. That vow had been quiet, made over old coffee and a folded letter he never sent. Tonight he didn't remember when he broke it, only that he had, and the rifle had felt familiar in his grip, like a sin returned. The man they'd captured, a Crow Hollow boy with a busted lip and rope burns along his wrists, groaned against the far wall. Clara had tied him with precision, securing his hands and feet while Jonah covered the room. The outlaw was young, maybe no older than 20. His defiance was loud, but his eyes had the twitchy sheen of someone watching for a door to open that never would. Jonah hadn't spoken since he dragged the boy in, but he'd listened. Clara leaned in toward their prisoner now, speaking low. You know what's in that ledger? The boy sneered. Stories. She tilted her head. The kind that get men hanged. He spat on the floor, missing her boots by inches. You think the law's clean? Clara straightened. I don't, but I think I can find one man who ain't bought. The boy chuckled dry, bitter. Silas'll find you first. Jonah stepped away from the window at that, crossed the room, boots silent on worn floorboards. He knelt beside the boy. You like breathin'? He asked. The boy nodded, just once. Then you tell me what towns Silas has men in. Tell me which deputies wear badges bought in blood. Tell me where you go when you disappear. The boy looked away, jaw tight. Jonah said nothing more. He stood and returned to the window. Clara moved beside him. He's afraid. He should be, Jonah said. Not of us, of what follows. Outside, the torchlight danced lower now. The gang was settling into a longer game, waiting, watching, adjusting. Jonah knew the rhythm. He'd led men into similar patterns before, in fields back east where the air smelled of iron and pine. The trick wasn't surviving the first wave, it was staying sharp through the quiet before the second. Clara stood and paced lightly, checking her shotgun, listening for boot falls in the dark. The sound came soft, bare branches cracking near the back wall. She paused, signaled 2 fingers. Jonah answered with a nod. He moved to the rear shutter, cracked it just enough to see a crouched figure nearing the cellar hatch. A different man this time, bigger, cautious. He carried a coil of rope in one hand and a bottle in the other. Clara moved silently to the hatch. She eased the panel open an inch, positioned the shotgun. Jonah raised his rifle. The man reached for the cellar door. Jonah waited. Clara waited. Then, Jonah fired. The round hit clean through the shoulder. The man dropped with a shout, bottles shattering in the dust. Clara flung the door open and leveled her gun. "Don't," she said. The man writhed, blood dark against his vest. Another voice called from the trees. "That makes 3, Jonah." It was Silas again, closer now. He sounded annoyed. "You always did hold a grudge." Clara moved back inside. Jonah pulled the hatch shut and rebarred it. "They're testing angles," she said. "They'll keep testing." "You ever wonder how he made it out of Cold Creek?" she asked. Jonah's jaw twitched. "I let him." Clara turned. Eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because he saved my life once. In another war. Before he forgot which side he was on." Clara didn't ask more. There wasn't time. The captured outlaw laughed through bloodied teeth. "You two make a fine story." Clara ignored him. The wind returned for a moment, carrying the smell of smoke and something else. Char. The porch post had caught again. Jonah moved fast, blanket ready. He snuffed it out, but this time, the fire had licked up part of the wall. The cabin would hold, but not forever. Clara stood near the door, watching the torchlight shift. "They're getting desperate." "They're running out of men," Jonah said. A shout rose from the south flank, then a gunshot. Jonah peered through the curtain. 2 men were dragging a third, limping. Clara guessed the trapline had taken him. "He won't walk again," Jonah said. "They're losing patience." The captured boy spoke again. "You think you're going to win this. This isn't a story with a clean ending." "No," Jonah said. "It's a story with a ledger full of names. That's the ending I care about." Suddenly, the torchlight dimmed. A figure walked forward from the trees, tall, broad, a dark shape that swallowed flame. Silas Drumlin. Clara saw him first. "He's here." Jonah stepped outside the door, rifle down, but not loose. Silas stood at the edge of the clearing, torch in one hand, pistol at his side. His coat flared in the wind, hat shadowing his face. He looked like someone carved from the same dust as the land. "You always were hard to kill," Silas said. Jonah didn't smile. "You always made it easy to try. Come to parley. Come to warn." Silas tilted his head. "Warn who?" "You. This is your last mile. You step past that fence and you answer for every name in that ledger." Silas smiled then. It was a grin made of teeth and cruelty. "You really think some paper's gonna stop men like me?" "No," Jonah said, "but it'll stop the men who let you in their towns, who sign your bribes and cover your fires." Clara stood behind the door, listening, watching. Silas's face hardened. "You hand over the girl, the book, and I let you walk." Jonah shook his head once. "She's not the one running." Silas raised his pistol. "Then you're both dead." He fired. Jonah ducked just as the shot whistled past. Clara swung the door open and fired twice. The torch Silas held dropped, but he was already gone, ducking behind the trees. A yell rose from the brush, another gang member charging from the right. Clara moved fast, swinging wide through the room. She fired through the side window. The man fell, rolled, and didn't move again. Jonah stepped back in, blood at his temple where the glass had shattered. "You good?" she asked. He nodded, wiping the cut with his sleeve. The captured outlaw had gone silent now. His eyes watched everything, but his mouth stayed shut. Jonah reloaded. "They'll try again," he said. Clara leaned against the frame, breath shallow. "You really think we make it out?" she asked. Jonah met her gaze. "I don't think anything. I just keep standing." Outside, the torchlight scattered again, splitting in 3 directions, movement on both sides. "They're coming," Clara said. Jonah nodded. "Let 'em." The first man reached the porch and dropped to a crouch. Jonah fired, once. The man slumped. Another tried the back window. Clara was there first. Shotgun braced. She didn't hesitate. Another body dropped in the dirt. 2 more remained. One broke for the trees, vanished into the night. The last dropped his gun, raised both hands. Jonah stepped out, rifle held loose across his chest. The firelight cast long shadows behind him. Clara followed, breath hot in the cold night. From somewhere deeper in the dark, Silas's voice echoed, fading, bitter. "You'll regret this, Keats. You'll die for nothing." Jonah didn't answer. He stood beneath the stars, silent. Clara stepped beside him. Eyes on the man still breathing. "You think he's coming back?" she asked. "Yes," Jonah said, voice quiet. "But next time it won't be with fire." By dawn, the guns had cooled and the land had gone still. But silence didn't mean peace, not out here. The fire had died down to smoke trails curling into the pale pink of morning. Ash clung to the edges of the porch, faint footprints scuffing through blackened dirt like the shadows of ghosts. A breeze moved low and tired through the trees, brushing over bodies that had not yet been buried. The ridge was quiet again, not with comfort, but with aftermath. Jonah Keats stood on the steps of his cabin with a tin cup in hand. The coffee inside had long since gone cold. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. Across the yard, Clara Boone knelt by the last shallow grave, sweat drying on her neck, her hands caked in blood and soil. The work was slow and clean. She didn't cry. She didn't talk. She only moved with the certainty of someone who understood what respect cost when the world tried to burn it away. They had buried 4. No names were spoken, no prayers, just rocks stacked at the heads, rough and cold. The 5th man was not buried. He was still breathing. The outlaw Jonah had dragged from the trap now sat tied to Ash's saddle. A length of rope looped around his chest like a mule harness. His lip had split in 2 places. One eye was swollen shut, but he hadn't begged. He watched Clara with something between fear and recognition. Jonah watched him too. He'd promised no mercy, but mercy wasn't the same thing as justice. Clara stood at last and brushed the dirt from her skirt. Her fingers trembled just once. She looked up at Jonah. "You think burying them makes us decent?" she asked, voice low. "No," he said, "but not burying them makes us like them." The wind kicked up dust in the canyon. The cabin, scorched in places but still standing, creaked in the boards like an old man adjusting to a new wound. Clara walked toward the steps and sat beside Jonah. For a long stretch, neither spoke. Then she reached into the folds of her bag and pulled out the cloth bundle, the ledger. She unwrapped it with care, revealing its cracked leather cover and the fraying twine loop that bound its spine. She opened it to the first page. Let the names breathe. Jonah looked over her shoulder and nodded once. "We take it to Stillwater," he said. "To Marshal Abram Tillman." She turned the pages slowly, not reading the names aloud. "He's still one of the good ones?" "He served under me, in another life. You trust him?" "I trust who he used to be. It's more than I can say for anyone else." Clara kept turning. Some names had check marks, others were crossed out. Her father's name was listed under a column marked obstacle. No reason. Just that word. Her breath caught, but she kept going. "My mother followed him into the ground," she said. "Heart gave out 6 weeks after they buried him. Some folks said it was grief. I think it was the town, the silence. It strangled her slow." Jonah listened, but didn't speak. "I was 13, she continued. "I tried to leave, but Drumlin made sure I stayed close. Married me off to a banker in Burnt Willow, the kind that collects more than debts, the kind that thinks wives don't have voices." Her fingers stopped turning pages. "I stayed quiet a long time," she said. "Longer than I knew was possible. But then, one day I saw him hand that banker a thick envelope. I knew the handwriting. Same as the ledger. Same as my father's death. Jonah stood, walked down the steps. He poured water from the barrel into the basin and splashed it over his face. Steam rose off his skin in the morning chill. He dried his hands on the back of his trousers and turned. "We leave tonight," he said, "before Drumlin regroups, before word spreads to Burnt Willow." Clara nodded. "What happens if Stillwater's bought too?" Jonah looked out toward the east. The land stretched open and dry, untouched by time or mercy. "Then we go farther." He glanced at Ash, then the outlaw slumped in the saddle. "We take him with us," Jonah said. "He knows too much to leave behind." The boy stirred, mouth tight. "You think Tillman's gonna give a damn what I say?" he sneered. "No," Jonah answered, "but your face says enough." They packed what they could. Clara wrapped the ledger in a flour sack, tied it tight, and slid it into Jonah's saddlebag. She took only a tin of cartridges, the shotgun, and a folded photograph from her coat. An image of a man and a girl on a front porch, blurred at the edges, brittle from being folded too many times. Jonah added his war medal to the same bag as the ledger. It hadn't seen daylight in over a decade. He didn't polish it, didn't touch the ribbon, just slid it in, shut the flap, and buckled it closed. By midday, the graves were marked, the shutters nailed shut, the hearth was cold. Jonah looked around the cabin once more. His eyes caught on the cross he'd carved into the porch rail before the siege. Just a mark and a date, nothing fancy. He let his fingers rest there a moment, then turned away. They left Hollow Bluff as the sun crested the hills. Jonah rode up front, the outlaw tied behind him, silent now. Clara followed close behind, her eyes sweeping the horizon, hand never far from her shotgun. The trail south wound through dried creek beds and thorn fields. They made no fire that night. They slept in turns, back to back, beneath a leaning rock near Juniper Hollow. The stars were colder out there, sharper somehow, like the sky knew what they carried. At one point, Clara rolled over and looked at Jonah, who hadn't closed his eyes. "You never told me what you were before the war," she said. He didn't answer at first. Then softly, "I was a pastor's son, taught to fix fences. Quote the Psalms." She studied him in the dark. "What happened? I learned fences don't hold back fire, and Psalms don't stop bullets." She didn't press. The next morning, before the sun broke, they rode again. At the edge of the bluff, Clara paused. She turned to look back. The cabin was gone from view now, swallowed by trees and memory, but in her mind it remained. Wood scorched, windows broken, floor stained with a truth no one else had dared to tell. She faced forward again. "We ride light," Jonah said. "No trail, no fire, no sleep till sunrise." She nodded. "And when we get there?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Then we light a fire they can't put out." "He'll come again," Clara said, watching the sunrise. "But next time, he won't bring fire." Jonah nodded once. "No, he'll bring the law." Some roads are made of dust and stone. Others are made of decisions you don't come back from. The trail south snaked like a scar through the hardback earth, brittle under hoof and silent beneath the sun. The land was stretched dry and lean, dotted with broken juniper and ghosted fence posts where homesteads had once stood. It was the kind of trail that didn't forgive. You rode it with your sins in the saddlebag, and your regrets rattling with each canteen swing. Jonah Keats rode first, rifle strapped across his back, war medal and ledger tucked into the depths of his weathered pack. His shoulders bore the stiffness of old wounds. Clara Boone followed close behind, her shotgun tucked beneath the saddle blanket, and her eyes drawn to the land's edges. She scanned the horizon with the caution of someone who had learned to expect pain at every bend. Tethered behind Jonah's horse was the outlaw, still bruised, still silent. The rope bound his chest and arms, but his legs dangled free, his boots dragging lines in the dust like unfinished signatures. He had stopped trying to talk sometime the morning after Hollow Bluff. Something in the silence had broken him, not with cruelty, but with certainty. Clara had seen it happen before, in courtrooms and kitchens and backroom chapels. Men don't always fear bullets. They fear being seen. The sun hung like brass in the sky. By the time the canyon narrowed, sweat had soaked through Jonah's collar and crusted at the folds of Clara's sleeves. They hadn't spoken much. Words felt too heavy out here. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer defensive. It was shared, lived in. The kind of quiet that lets memory rise gently to the top. They stopped only once that day, near a broken windmill whose blades had fallen to the ground like twisted feathers. Jonah tied off the horses and poured water into a dented tin pan, enough for Ash to drink. Clara crouched by the shade of a rock ledge, the ledger in her lap. She turned a page, her eyes flicking down the names. There was one marked simply, Stillwater, M.B. Beside it, funds delivered. Daughter relocated. "Who's M.B.?" she asked. Jonah didn't look up. Could be Marcus Briley, used to be county assessor. He's still in office? He's the reason we're not walking through town with this thing in the open. She closed the ledger, tied it tight again, and looked across the dry basin. My father used to say God kept 3 ledgers, one for truth, one for blood, and one for names. He said the last one never lied. Jonah sat beside her, took a drink from the canteen, and passed it over. I thought that once, too. She took a swig, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Why'd you really leave the war? She asked. I didn't, he said. It left me. They rode again as the shadows lengthened. The trail rose over cracked stone and dropped into a gully filled with half-buried fence wire and a burned-out cart still blackened from some long-forgotten raid. Near dusk, Clara's horse stumbled, catching its foreleg on a loosened stirrup strap. She steadied it, climbed down, and checked the rigging. Her hands moved fast, but careful. Jonah stopped ahead, watching her quietly. As she worked, he noticed her left hand was shaking, not from fatigue, but from something else. You all right? He asked. I'm fine, she replied, too quickly. He dismounted, stepped closer. She exhaled, stood up straight. I dreamed last night, she said, eyes distant, that I was back in Burnt Willow. I was wearing a white dress, the kind they give you when you're married off like cattle. I could feel the lace cutting into my arms. Everyone had your face. Jonah didn't speak. She looked at him. Not your face now. Your face then. The soldier. The one who looked away. I've looked away too many times, he said. And now. He adjusted the saddle cinch. Now I look where it hurts. They made camp at a shallow bend in the trail, where cottonwoods clung to the edges of a dry creek bed. Jonah started a fireless meal. Hardtack, cured meat, a tin of cold beans. Clara ate in silence. The outlaw remained tied near a wagon wheel sunk in the dirt, chewing slowly, his eyes flicking between them like he didn't trust the quiet. A rider passed just after moonrise. A boy, maybe 15, wearing no badge but riding fast with a bag slung over one shoulder. He didn't stop, didn't even glance their way. But Jonah watched the dust he left behind, watched it settle. Courier, he murmured. Maybe from Calder's Fork. Clara stiffened. You think they know we're headed south? Drumlin's not stupid. He'll guess. He'll get there first. Maybe, but we've got the only thing that matters. She glanced at the ledger. No, Jonah said. We've got you. The next day passed in a blur of heat and dust. They passed through a valley littered with buffalo bones and wind-blasted markers where a town had once stood. A rusted horseshoe hung from a leaning cross. Someone had carved initials into it, but time had worn them away. Clara paused there, looked at the bones. You think this was someone's beginning or someone's end? Both, Jonah said. They entered Stillwater Junction at dusk. The town lay low against the hills, its buildings crouched like dogs in the dust. Lanterns flickered behind warped windows. A bell chimed once from the far side, the tone cracked and tired. The sheriff's office sat at the corner of Main and Cross. A single oil lamp burned inside. Jonah dismounted, untied the outlaw, and dragged him across the boardwalk. Clara followed with the ledger pressed to her chest. Inside, the room smelled of whiskey and ink. A man sat behind the desk, older, gray at the temples, clean-shaven, eyes sharp as barbed wire. He looked up, paused, then stood. Jonah Keats, he said. Abram. The two men stared at each other. Neither offered a hand. Jonah dropped the outlaw onto a bench. Clara stepped forward. We've got something you need to see. Abram Tillman studied her a moment, then nodded once. Jonah pulled the ledger from his bag and placed it on the desk. The marshal opened it, page by page. His expression didn't change until the 5th name. Then his jaw locked, and by the 10th, his hands began to tremble. You understand, Jonah said. We couldn't go anywhere else. Tillman didn't speak for a long time. Then he closed the book. God help us, he whispered. You didn't just bring names, Jonah. You brought a fire. Some say they walked into Stillwater as outlaws. Others say they never walked in at all. Only the truth did. It had been nearly an hour since Jonah Keats placed the ledger on Marshal Abram Tillman's desk, but the room still hadn't exhaled. The marshal sat behind his desk, the oil lamp casting hard shadows beneath his eyes. His fingers rested atop the closed ledger as though it might leap from the desk if he didn't keep it pinned. The silence between the three of them, Jonah, Clara, and Tillman, stretched long and tight like a fence wire at dusk. Outside, the town of Stillwater Junction wore its dusk lightly. Horses clopped in the distance. A piano wheezed somewhere beyond the saloon. A tired rendition of a song that had been played too many times with too much dust in its keys. But inside the marshal's office, the world had shrunk to one truth-heavy book and what it now demanded. Clara leaned against the wall near the door, her eyes never leaving the marshal. Her hands were steady, but she kept her shotgun propped within arm's reach. She knew how quickly faces changed when the weight of names pressed down hard enough. She'd seen it in courtrooms and pulpits, where men's convictions folded under their own shadows. Tillman finally spoke, his voice low. Some of these names wear stars. Others wear crosses. One of them sits on the Territorial Land Board. Jonah nodded. They've been hiding in plain sight for years. And this. Tillman lifted the ledger gently, turned a page. It's real. I bled to get it here, Clara said. I watched people die for what's in there. Some still will. Tillman's gaze moved to her. It softened, not with pity, but recognition. You the one from Burnt Willow? He asked. I'm the one who won't run anymore. He closed the ledger, gently, like covering a body. Give me till morning, he said. Jonah raised an eyebrow. You gonna make arrests? I'll do more than that. I'll call in federal attention. This ain't just a county stink, it's a disease. We start cutting. We cut deep. Clara stepped forward. We don't want credit, or headlines, just justice. You'll get it, Tillman said. She studied him a long moment, then finally nodded. Tillman stood, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out 2 clean blankets and a ring of keys. You can bed down in the holding cells tonight. Door won't be locked. Safer than any inn. Jonah took the keys. And the outlaw. Tillman glanced at the bruised young man still tied near the door. He'll be processed in the morning. If he talks, we'll listen. They didn't argue. The cell block in the back of the marshal's office was cold, but clean. Clara took the first cell, laying her blanket over the cot without comment. Jonah sat outside her cell on a stool, his rifle resting across his thighs. Neither of them slept much. Clara stared at the ceiling, eyes open to the dark. "I never thought I'd see it," she whispered. "Someone listening?" Jonah said nothing for a while. Then, "Truth's not always loud. Sometimes it just waits." By morning, the wind had picked up again. The air smelled of coming rain, the first in weeks. Jonah stepped out into the street while Clara freshened up inside. Stillwater Junction was waking slow. Shopkeepers lifting awnings, stagecoaches arriving, a dog barking at a boy with a loaf of bread. But there was something else in the air, too. A stillness that didn't belong to dawn. Like the town was holding its breath. Then came the deputy. He stumbled through the saloon doors with blood on his shirt and a folded badge in his hand. He moved like a man who had seen something unholy and wasn't sure if he'd escaped it. Tillman met him halfway. "What happened?" the marshal barked. The deputy handed over the badge. "Burnt Willow's sheriff is dead. So's the banker. Someone torched the land office. Drumlin's people are moving." Clara appeared behind Jonah in the doorway. "They're trying to clean house," she said. "Get ahead of the names." Tillman opened the ledger again. "We'll need to move fast," he said. "Publicly. Bring the judge. Hold a hearing." "That ledger'll vanish if you wait too long," Jonah warned. Tillman slammed the book shut. "Then we don't wait." Within the hour, the town square was filling. Tillman stood on the courthouse steps with the ledger in one hand and the town bell clanging behind him. Names were read. Charges spoken aloud. Faces blanched in the crowd. Some in guilt, others in shock. It didn't matter. The record had begun. Clara stood off to the side, watching it unfold. A small girl tugged at her sleeve. She turned and met two wide blue eyes. "Are you the firewoman?" the girl asked. Clara knelt down, unsure what to say. "I heard you came from the ridge," the girl said. "My papa says ghosts live there." Clara smiled. Only the kind that remember. By late afternoon, the town had shifted. 4 arrests, 2 resignations. A third man rode out before the ink dried. Jonah and Clara packed their saddlebags without speaking. The ledger had been left with Tillman. Their names weren't in it, but their silence was. They didn't tell anyone they were leaving. They didn't need to. At the canyon's edge, just past the last turn from town, Clara pulled her horse to a stop. "We did it," she said. Jonah looked west. The sun was dipping low, stretching shadows long. "No," he said. "We just made it possible." She didn't ask where they were headed. He didn't offer. The trail was open. That was enough. Behind them, Stillwater breathed again. Some said they were bounty hunters. Some said she was a widow carrying vengeance in her bones, and he a soldier who never stopped fighting. Others said they were never real, just wind and ash, passing through to set fire where rot had taken hold. But for those who listened close, who stayed up late near the edge of the canyon, there were whispers of 2 riders, one silent, one bright as flame, and a ledger that burned hotter than any match. And if you ever find yourself out near Hollow Bluff, follow the hoof prints, they're always fresh, and listen close. You might just hear the wind whisper a name that never made it into any book, but should have. And so the trail fades, like smoke into dusk. And all that's left behind are hoof prints pressed into the hardpan earth, and a silence that feels less like emptiness and more like memory, carried in the breath of wind that curls through pine and past sun-cracked fence posts. Out there in that kind of country, you don't forget the sound of an old war horse's tread, or the whisper of a woman's voice who once carried fire beneath her ribs instead of fear. And though the days roll forward, the land never really forgets the shape of the souls who rode across it, not when the porch rail still bears the carving of a cross and a date, Not when wildflowers grow from the edge of graves that were dug by hand, beneath moonlight with no hymn, but the hiss of cooling ash. Not when an old ledger, once bound in rope and blood, still sleeps inside a locked drawer in a courthouse that smells of cedar and truth. And not when the people of Stillwater speak in hushed tones about the woman who came with no name, and the man who carried every name he had ever failed. And they remember the way she stood on the edge of justice, like someone who had already died once, but refused to die quiet. The way he watched the horizon like it owed him something it never repaid. The way both of them chose not vengeance, but testimony. Not thunder, but truth. And that's something this old country don't often give you. The chance to lay your burden down and leave a legacy made of quiet decisions and small mercies. The kind you don't write songs about, but which echo louder than any gunshot. And maybe that's why the ledger meant something. Not just for the names inside, but for the two people who refused to let it disappear, who brought it farther than any lawman dared to carry it, who delivered it not for gain or revenge, but because they understood that a lie unspoken is still a wound, and sometimes the deepest kind. And though no statue stands for them, and no ballad sings their names across saloon walls or canyon halls, the truth they carried left roots in that land, sprouting up in the places where children now grow without the shadow of bought law, in the towns where a preacher reads real sermons again, and no one pockets the offering, in the letters that now get delivered with real ink and not the weight of silence, and still, on certain nights, if the moon's hung just right over Hollow Bluff and the wind comes off the ridge with a whisper that sounds almost like a name, you'll feel it too. That low vibration of honor rising from the dirt, the kind that was once buried but never erased, never because justice, belated as it may be, has a longer spine than time itself, and the woman once forgotten now stands in the legend of all those who chose not to stay quiet, and the man who once failed to act chose at last to stand, and in doing so, redeemed not just himself, but every soul who ever sat too long on the edge of conscience. And in the end, it wasn't the fire that cleansed, but the silence they broke. And in that silence came something gentle, something human, something that tasted like peace at last. And if you've still got a bit of that peace in you, if your bones stirred while the wind told this tale, leave a sign behind, just a small one, like a lantern in the window or a word in the dust, to let the next soul know they weren't the first to believe. And if you believe, let it show. Let it be known that stories like these still matter, still heal, still hold, because the truth doesn't need a crowd, only a witness. And if you've listened this far, maybe you're the witness this story needed. And if your heart moved, even just a little, we invite you to follow this trail again, subscribe to our channel, and ride with us next time as we uncover the next old wound, the next forgotten promise, the next fire that waits quietly beneath the dust for a name to set it free.